Hello, this is day one of Who.
Okay. So, start of the whole 50 days, whatever. Okay. Now, according to the instructions that Nemesis Vids left me, he somehow hacked into my iPhone, and that will provide me with certain things. Okay. Strange rules, but simple nonetheless. So, let's just check in it. Why does the calendar say Sunday, October 6th? Could have sworn that. What did the end of that first video say? Yeah. The hell? I'm a day late and I haven't even started yet. The hell's going on?
Okay, so day one of this goofy little thing. Yeah, this is happening. I'm trapped in a purgatory of my own making, whatever the hell that means. In reality, I'm just kind of being annoyed by some guy on the internet who has the weirdest personal hero I've ever seen. Oh, okay, fine. I know there's someone out there who actually looks to Captain Crunch for guidance, but this one's still pretty weird. The guy's following a fake villain on a YouTube channel. Whatever. That review show, I don't even know what he did, but okay. So, I'm just going to assume this is just endless karma for my endless comments about Dan taking over Geekvolution.
Which is true, by the way.
However, this karma is taken form of a weirdo who is stalking a fictional supervillain. Oh well, fine. We all know the format of Spawn Year, so I'm just going to give the notebooks he provided and... Hold on, I got a text. Dear bearded slave guy, I can't afford the notebooks. Could you help me out and use your laptop instead? Sure, why not? Why not? So, what are we going to do for day one of Who? What are we going to do? You people are probably assuming we're going to do a good old classic. The first adventure of our good old doctor. That guy with the white hair who more or less looks like a knockoff version of Einstein meets Ebenezer Scrooge. You're right, we are meeting his first adventure. Quinnis! None of you know what that is, do you? Well, okay, let me backtrack here. I was thrown for a loop here, and I'm going to throw the rest of you for a loop here. We're not doing the first story in the show's history. No, we're doing something that predates it on the Doctor's personal timeline. Also, before I go on, yeah, it looks like we're going to be looking at stuff that's not television. From the looks of it, that and from the fact that Nemesis Vids doesn't look like a reader, we're probably just going to be looking at this audio drama and audio book material, since this is from the Companion Chronicle range of Big Finish Productions. Fine by me, I love their productions either way, and also, let's face it, if you had me try to read books, this show would be a good 50 months of Who, because I am a slow reader, man. But okay. So basically, this is going to be fascinating. It's fascinating to me because I've learned so much about the franchise at this point. So the prospect of an adventure set before the very first episode of Doctor Who is one that does capture the imagination of any fan, let alone me. And again, it's produced by Big Finish Productions, performed by a member of the original cast, and written by someone who I see as a great writer in terms of Who. Mark Platt's his name. Other names you'll probably know him for if you know Doctor Who is he did Ghostlight for television, but after that became big in novels. Does a lot of stuff for Big Finish to this day. Basically from towards the beginning when they started to now, he's been writing stuff. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked that we see one of his more recent entries here on this show. His biggest claim to fame, which is one of those that's always touted for Big Finish, is Spare Parts, which is more or less the origin of the Cybermen. Sadly, I don't think we're going to be covering that, but hey, we can always wish. What's also very interesting is Quinnis is another fascinating fact because it's a planet that's been mentioned before once in a offhand reference in the third story in the show's run, Edge of Destruction. Literally a throwaway line. At no point were they ever thinking we're going to go to the planet Quinnis, and this came out around 2010-ish. So yeah, they took a long time for that line to get properly exploited. I can't talk. Well, yeah, it took a lot of time for that line to be properly exploited. The story shows our time duo, I'm never calling them again, on the titular planet of Quinnis. Well, it has a TARDIS with a fully functioning chameleon circuit and shifts wonderfully into whatever the hell the planet needs to. Also, this is audio, so describing this part was probably pointless, but hey, they told you, I need to tell you. That's how information works. Platt doesn't waste time on something like the Doctor and Susan choosing their names. He just tells a story. That's one thing I was worried about. Were they going to do that prequel kind of thing where you have to point out all these things that would maybe show up later? Like, look, there's the scanner. Oh my god, we have cavemen, or something like that. Really annoying background stuff that doesn't need to be set up for everything. I'm really going off script here, but I'm going to keep trying. Our story shows our time duo, never saying that again. It shows our two characters landing on the titular planet of Quinnis. Well, it has a TARDIS with a fully functioning chameleon circuit and shifts wonderfully into the Doctor and Susan's visit to the 1960s Earth. Platt doesn't waste time with something like the Doctor and Susan choosing their names. He just tells a story that is mostly about the narrator itself. Another thing about the Companion Chronicles before I go on, because I have a feeling we might look at at least one more in this range, you never know, is they're not done like a traditional audiobook, meaning they just have a reader telling you the story. The way they do it is they have the narrator. The story shows our time duo landing on the titular planet of Quinnis. I just called them a time duo, didn't I? Yeah, never doing that again. Well, it has a TARDIS with a fully functioning chameleon circuit, which of course is a big deal in the show, so it, isn't a police box. Story doesn't really linger on that fact. That's one thing about this one off the bat, is though it does take place before an earthly child, I was kind of afraid that it was going to have a bunch of, or at least what they could in terms of subtle things, like, really hammering home that the Doctor is very grumpy, or has a cane, or has a magic ring. Yeah, he has a magic ring. It's only brought up like twice and never brought up again, and I hope to God we don't actually run into it. But yeah, stuff like that. Just bringing up stuff. Which would be fine, which is fine, kind of considering how the name of the planet just comes from an offhand line delivered in an episode of the old show. Dramatic pause for myself. You can edit around this, me. Platt doesn't waste time on something like the Doctor and Susan choosing their names or anything mundane. He just tells a story that's principally about the narrator and its events that lead to her being put in. Basically, it can be looked at as a quasi lead-in into it. It is subtly said that we're going to go to a planet that's safe and unassuming, Earth. That's definitely this. You could definitely look at this as the lead-in to them staying on Earth. Carol Ann Ford comes back for this. A big thing about the Companion Chronicles I need to get out of the way. They're not done like traditional audiobooks per se. They're told as if they were a story by the character who is the subject. In this case, it's the Doctor's granddaughter, Susan. So it's not just Carol Ann Ford telling you a story, it's Susan telling you a story that happened to her. And it even has some subtle bits that tie into adventures that Big Finish would do with the Eighth Doctor. Which, I do like that. I like that small tie-in to all of this stuff, including a big thing is they run into a fish that they eventually capture, which plays a big part in the future story. one that Platt would end up doing. And that's what I keep saying. I do like this subtle. It's not trying to, say, "Oh, look, there's that." It just happens to have those elements. I don't think it glorifies the fact that, oh, this is where this happens. It just does it naturally, as if it was any story. If in fact, if you could watch them in any order, you wouldn't see them putting so much attention to something. But either way, she does a great job of recreating Susan as she was back in the day. Also, it's very interesting to look at their dynamic alone, because when we get to it, well, if we ever do get to Unearthly Child, I don't know. We don't get any moments of them. Sure, we get a few moments of them alone, acting, in their respective roles as a grandfather and granddaughter. But they also have two other characters to kind of, bump off of, and so we never really get to see what they're like privately. Particularly, the plot pivots on Susan's lack of direction and the choices she makes. Basically, shows what happens. I will say this. You get the idea that she is perceived very young and kind of relies on her grandfather. She doesn't really have a lot of confidence in herself or any real common sense on how to handle a situation. She's smart, and this story in particular does show that she's plenty smart, but not... She's lacking the street smarts. She's loaded with the book smarts. What's really interesting is Susan is being led astray by this little annoying little girl who's causing tons of mischief. Basically, okay, imagine this part of the story is a drug PSA, where the person is giving Susan drugs and making her do all kinds of really bad things, like knocking over fruit stands, which that does happen in here, I think. Just really, basically getting her in trouble, showing that Susan needs guidance and she trusts people too easily. It's more or less just a story that builds her up. What's also really hilarious is this terrible influence is played by Ford's real-life daughter. And she plays the character of Medilla. Yes, that's her name, and yes, I realize it sounds like that character that Tyler Perry created. We're not all perfect. Let's just move on from the terrible things. And what's great is it's a suitably unearthly ambiguity to it. She doesn't come off like I am bad, but you don't know. She kind of, you might think she's good, but she could be a troublemaker. She doesn't really have the moment she shows up, you can't put a pulse on her character, that's for sure. At times, her performance, she becomes a shining thing over her mother herself. And most of the story is actually these two characters, since they have the two actors playing off each other. And I think as a mother and daughter working with each other, playing characters that aren't related, I think they have wonderful chemistry. As, we kind of see her as more or less the villain of the piece. It's also worth noting that even though it's audio, this story does have a lot of descriptive, very powerful imagery. Which is good since Platt, of course, did a lot of Who novels, so he's really pushing his skills as a prose writer into this format really well. Honestly, the only thing I can get is there's this whole subplot about how Quinnis is, a big thing about Quinnis is it hasn't had rain in years. And there's this whole thing where they believe the Doctor is the rainmaker of legend, someone who can bring the rain. The thing is, though, Platt's rainmaker Doctor, as we'll call him, is painted a little more... Okay, this is going to sound strange, considering a lot of people complain about this Doctor. My only complaint about this story is Platt's Rainmaker Doctor. Yeah, and a big thing about this is, a big subplot about the story is Quinnis has been suffering a huge drought, and the people believe that the Doctor is the Rainmaker of legend. The whole thing about this is the Doctor sort of, kind of goes along with this really fast. Part of that might be the fact that this is only about an hour long, and they needed to get that part of the plot out of the way. But he seems just in other situations like this, he'd be very resilient to get involved, even if it's another planet's well-being. And also, he doesn't come off like a grump at all in this one, which is a big hallmark of at least the early Hartnell version of the Doctor. He's very he's kind of a textbook example of a curmudgeon. Generally a good person, but if he gets pissed at you, he's gonna beat you with his cane if you're in reach. Again, it's a nitpick, and he does kind of become... Towards the end of this, he definitely gets back in that mode of being a curmudgeon, as the matters progress. And also, he's no hero. That's the thing. I just kind of was a little put off by how he was in the beginning. By the end, I think that everything was put back in. Everything was fixed. He does have a wider regard for the welfare of the universes, which doesn't seem to... Well, here's the thing. Hartnell, I won't really necessarily tell you, has this huge regard, like other Doctors. He doesn't have this huge regard of protecting the universe. He's very much still kind of... Okay, let me explain it to you this way. Hartnell, the whole point of the Doctor, which I'm spoiling things now, but I might forget whenever it actually does become relevant. But this man escaped his home planet. Mainly because he did not like how his species handled their ability with time travel. They more or less squander it and just use it to look at things. They don't try and get involved, they just look at it from a distance, and he found that boring. While the Doctor is okay with stepping into the universe and the history, I wouldn't tell you he's careless, but in this story he's very concerned about the welfare of pretty much all these people. And it doesn't sit quite right. He's very mind my own business kind of guy. He doesn't try to save people because he's not a hero. Like I said, he's no hero. And this one paints him like what he would... Basically, paint him like what most incarnations would go with, as this unassuming protector of the universe. And that's the thing about William Hartnell Doctor I like, is he's not necessarily that. He's just a kooky old man who wanted to look at crap. Not that I don't dislike the idea that he is the guardian who will protect everyone, but the fact that this Doctor doesn't, it wasn't even really intended that way back then, and writers, at least writers who would do stuff later on, years after his Doctor has passed, they would keep to that core. And in fact, other stories in this range, one by Mark Platt himself, nonetheless, played this way, and that's the thing. I feel like that's just an inconsistency that's wrong with this character. I'll say this. The rest of the story is fine. Susan kind of getting in struggles and trying to decide, basically deciding that she needs guidance, that she's, though a very smart, academically gifted child, still as a child he needs guidance. She comes to terms with that at the end of the day she still needs protection. That's the whole of this story I like. The Rainmaker stuff isn't bad in itself, but Hartnell's portrayal, or at least the character's portrayal, since Hartnell's long gone, and all we get is Ford's impression of what that Doctor sounded like. It's just something that does bother me, and it does take a point away. Not enough to where I can't tell you I hate this. I still enjoyed this one a lot, and it does give you a promise that we can go any place in this guy's timeline and you could tell an interesting story out of it. This definitely did that. And also, if you're going to do stories with this format, the Companion Chronicle format is normally just normally the shows usually, would stick with the 4-part format in television, because that tended to be the right length to work with. If they went any longer, it tended to be kind of a bore, and if it went however, it went any shorter, which there were some cases of this happening, it might feel generally weaker because you're packing so much in that you rush through it. Companion Chronicle stories are usually handled well enough to where they're not this way, and this one's no exception. For the most part, the Doctor becoming the Rainmaker, I think, was a little rushed. I would have liked him to have, again, but that just goes with the whole inconsistency of his character at the beginning of this. I will, however, say that a 2-person TARDIS crew is perfect with this, because all we have to focus on, for the most part, is the main person, which of course would just be Susan in this case, and her kind of dealing with how the Doctor acts and any of the other side characters having to pop up. I do rather like this, and it's fun that, again, this story proves that you can go anywhere and an interesting story can be told.